A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Hi, and welcome to a very special Treason Day edition of Tactical Review. As you can tell by my recitation of the Second Amendment, I'm not reviewing anything today. We're actually going to talk a little bit of politics. And I hate politics. I never wanted to do anything political aside from the fact that this is a gun channel. But here, as we are right before July 4th, 2019, I can't help but think that there's not a more appropriate time for me to just make a little bit of commentary here based on legislation that's being introduced at the federal level, legislation that was just enacted in California and Washington. If you're watching from the West Coast, I can't imagine living in the conditions that you do and trying to practice my Second Amendment rights. Guys, I'm doing what I can for my part of the fight for you guys, supporting organizations that are supporting your fight. Godspeed. If you have the opportunity to move, we would welcome you here in the Midwest. Anyway, so I thought we would start because there seems to be a little bit of confusion surrounding the Second Amendment with something of a civic lesson. And this should sound familiar to you from your history classes and your government classes in high school and or college. If it doesn't, you need to look into finding a civics book and hopefully pre-revisionist. Anyway, I'm going to go with some really broad, high-level overviews, some real general time frames. But let's go back. And in 1776, on July 4th, as a matter of fact, the best breakup letter of history was written. We call that the Declaration of Independence today. And the colonists in the Americas, hey, that'd be us, well, the United States, they told Britain they'd had enough of it. They had enough of taxation without representation. They had enough of their government not supporting what they felt was right. And they definitely weren't having this whole crap of having their weapons taken away. So there was a bit of skirmish about that. And the colonies came out on top, kind of threw together a government. The first government was organized under what we call the Articles of Confederation. And that was replaced later by the Constitution. Now, the Constitution lays out a whole bunch of things about how the government works. Fun fact, the government works for you and I, the citizens. We do not labor for the government. It is of the people, for the people, and by the people. So this kind of oligarchy thing we've got going on right now with a bunch of haves in Washington and have-nots, and that's far removed, I think, from what the original concept was. Anyway, the Constitution lays out that there's a lot in there, you know, 3-branch government and some checks and balances and who's supposed to do this and not supposed to do that. And then it gives us, the people, the governed, a charge to guard against tyranny, to guard against oppression and excess, to stand vigilant is the main idea. But the Constitution does say right in there that if standing against and voting against doesn't work, then we're even supposed to, up and including overthrowing the government. Now, I'm not saying this is that time. I stand with, I believe it was Edward Payne, Thomas Paine. Well, now I feel foolish. Nonetheless, I've memorized the quote I prefer peace. But if violence must come, let it come in my time, that my children may know peace. And that's kind of where I stand. I'm not saying, hey, it's time to boogaloo. In fact, the guys who seem really excited about that concept frighten me a little bit too. I'm getting off on a tangent though. So anyway, we've got the Constitution, we've got some things laid out here, and some time goes by, and in 1791, the government, the leaders of the time, codified the first 10 amendments or changes to the Constitution, and really they're expansions. And we call those the Bill of Rights. And I think it's very important to note here that the Constitution doesn't grant us these rights. The Constitution recognizes that these are rights, not privileges, and basically says, hey, we understand this, the government needs to butt out. All right, we've got the right to free speech, to free press, and the right to practice whatever religion we choose to practice or not practice. The right to keep and bear arms, as I've already recited. Let's see, the Fifth Amendment, you don't have to say anything that incriminates yourself. We're not required to house our country's soldiers. We have the right to a speedy trial. If there's property value involved, we have the right to invoke a trial by jury. I'm missing several here. We don't have to put up with cruel and unusual punishment. It's good stuff. You should look up the Bill of Rights and read it. There's a lot of things that are spelled out as absolute human rights. You don't have to ask permission. Just there it is. But again, this isn't a civics channel. This isn't a history channel. Well, I mean, I have a gun channel. I like to talk about things that go bang and the accessories for things that go bang. And that's kind of where we're in a rub right now. Back in December, President Trump just up and outright banned bump stocks. Now, those are an accessory for a firearm. And he did so without any due process. Did so without offering compensation. That's a little cruel and unusual. I feel like that bump stock ban was very unconstitutional in a violation of several of the Bill of Rights. And full disclosure, I don't own a bump. I never did own a bump stock. I didn't lose it in a boating accident. I just never had one. Fact of the matter is, the only reason I want one now is because I'm not allowed to have one. But that's also irrelevant. This isn't a bash on President Trump video. This is, let's look a little bit closer and why do I think that was a Second Amendment violation? What do I think that the Second Amendment entails? And the first thing we need to do is kind of break down what it says, because the Constitution and the amendments, they're written in kind of more legal jargon to a degree, and we don't speak the same way now that was common in the late 1700s. So I'm going to recite it again. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, so let's modernize that vernacular a little bit. Let's unpack that. Because the whole thing starts out with a well-regulated militia. What about it? Well, it's necessary to the security of the free state. Now, that's our states, but let's face it, we can call the United States, we are an overarching state. A well-regulated group of armed individuals is necessary to the security of our country. Why? Well, let's look back then, okay? when the colonies first decided to overthrow British rule, before there was a standing army of any kind, we had the Minutemen. These were guys and gals who had their muskets to protect their flocks and their livestock. They had muskets to go get dinner, to protect themselves from ne'er-do-wells or highwaymen or whatever. These were their own personal weapons, and when the time came to stand up for a cause that they believed in, they rallied and they went and they risked their lives, and some of them died. And that got us to the point where then we could get to a standing army, which allowed for victory, and then, back to what I've already said. So within a decade or so after the Revolutionary War, they're like, we need to codify this, because without those armed citizens, without those armed individuals, we wouldn't have a country. So, being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people, citizens, people who haven't done dumb things to lose their rights, to keep and bear arms. Now, that doesn't just mean have. That doesn't mean, you can have something as long as it's been demilled and it doesn't work. You can have a keepsake or a memento. No, keep and bear. You can have it and you can use it. Shall not be infringed. The government's going to butt out. It's in the Constitution. It's what it says. Because it's necessary for our country to have legally armed individuals who know what they're doing with their weapons, the government's going to butt out. There we go. That's a modern rendering of the Second Amendment. Okay, now it doesn't just say firearms. I'd like to point this out. This really kind of chafes a little bit too. If you live in a state where you're not allowed to have martial arts weapons, nunchucks, throwing stars, you can only have a knife of a certain size, you can't have a collapsible baton, that's all an infringement of the Second Amendment. Alright, the fact of the matter is, if you can afford to legally acquire it, and you have the means to safely practice with it, well regulated, I'll come back to that, I think you should be able to own it. Well, Blair, what about a tank? Yep. If you can afford the JP-8 for that monster, right, and you can successfully crew that, and you're able to now there's other laws where we would come into play with that. If you want to have it on the roads, well, you're going to have to convert it to treads that aren't going to tear up the roads, and that's fine. If you have the money to do that and the means to arm it and practice with it, so that if we ever had to defend our country, you had a privately owned tank, I think you should. Well, what about machine guns? Yep. Up until 1986, you just walk into the gun store and walk out with a fully automatic weapon. It breaks my heart that there's so much right to... Actually, after the 30s, you had to go through all of the NFA hoopla and register it and all that. But up to 86, you could anything that was currently produced. And then there was the 86 machine gun ban, and now the only fully automatic weapons that are legally ownable by a private citizen are pre-ban. And so thus, last time I looked, a registered machine gun loader was going for as much as like $35,000. Also digressing. Okay. So anyway, what's my point? Okay, if the government has it, we should be able to have it. Sure. But I'd like to point out, because there seems to be some confusion in the so-called Pro-2A community about what the Second Amendment covers and doesn't cover. If I had a dollar for every time I've heard, we don't need 30 rounds to hunt, Well, you don't hunt with an AR-15. Well, first off, part of the reason I built my 300 Blackout gun in 300 Blackout is because I can go hunt with that. But second of all, hunting isn't what the Second Amendment's about. It's covered by it, keep and bear arms. That covers your right to go out hunting. It's part of bearing arms. Well, all I need is a shotgun to go shoot clays. That's fine. That's not what the Second Amendment's about. It's covered by it, not what it's about. Okay? Sport has nothing to do with the Second Amendment except that it's covered by it. See, we have to go back to that conversation that we are constitutionally obligated to choose the direction of our government, and if the government stops responding to the will of the people, to prevent that. To stand in deterrent and become forcible if necessary. Okay, so right now, there have been 2 bills introduced to Congress to ban suppressors on a national level because of one tragedy. As a matter of fact, before Virginia Beach, the only crimes I had heard about involving suppressors actually had to do with the illegal manufacture and possession. So it's all NFA garbage, not criminal intent, not violent crime. I hate to put on my tinfoil hat, but man, that's awful weird. But I'm not going to get off on that tangent because I'm also not a conspiracy theorist. What I am going to do, though, is remind you that there are organizations that are helping fight for our rights. But that's not their job. It's your job. It's my job. We the people. A government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So you need to be contacting your representatives. Now I'm going to look, and if Gun Owners of America or Firearms Policy Coalition have their easy links that you just click and it brings up a form letter that you can send to your representatives and your senators, I'll link that for you. If not, you need to be reaching out to your representatives in the government and saying, I am willing for no additional gun control. In fact, if possible, I'd like to walk back what we have. Now, I don't know about you, but primarily I'm a single issue voter. And I have been since the very first election I was able to vote in when I turned 18. And my wife and I had a discussion on this, actually. The first election, we were still dating. First election we were both able to vote in. And it's just like I told her, I can tell a lot about what a politician believes about every other type of personal liberty by where they stand on the Second Amendment. Because the fact of the matter is that I cannot think of an oppressive, tyrannical regime anywhere in the world, anywhere in history, that didn't start by disarming its citizens. Once citizens are disarmed, we're no longer citizens, we're subjects. The fact of the matter is that the Second Amendment is what lets us be the boss of the government. Because without the Second Amendment, they don't have to worry about being fired, if you will. If my boss wasn't able to fire me, he could spit and fume all he wanted and I wouldn't worry about it. Now, I happen to work for a bunch of good people and at a good place, and I try to be a decent human being. But regardless of that fact, you're going to be a lot more likely to take advantages if you don't have to worry about whether or not you can be fired. But it's the same thing for a government. As long as we're able to stand in deterrence of tyranny and oppression, the government can be fired forcibly if necessary. So, again, going off on a tangent, the reason I've not made this video before now is because every time I've tried to practice it, it's become a rant gone off on a tirade, gotten myself worked up, blood pressure through the roof, because it just frustrates me. And I would hope it frustrates you. We're looking at our rights being chipped away little by little by little. And it'll get to the point where when we realize that what we have left isn't enough, it'll be too late. So in that vein, whether you agree with me that the Second Amendment means if the government has it, if it exists and we can acquire it legally, we're allowed to have it, or you don't think that private citizens should have guns at all, shame on you. There will come a day where you wish you had a gun. Or you are somebody that some people would call a Fudd, where you think that the Second Amendment is just for sporting. Actually, I think that I'm talking to you maybe most of all. I want to remind you of the words of Pastor Martin Niemöller. You may not recognize the name, but he was living in Germany in the 30s. And he had this to say after the war. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. You might think that you're just hunky-dory if you can have your revolver and your 1911 and your bird gun and your hunting rifle. Everything's fine. You don't like my AR-15. You don't like the AK-47 I want. You don't think I should be allowed to have a suppressor. That's military hardware. Well, okay, they took bump stocks from everybody 7 months ago. And I wasn't paying attention at the time. I didn't speak out. If they take suppressors now, and then they take magazines over 10 rounds, and then they take semi-automatics entirely, so we can have pump guns and break action guns and straight pull guns and revolvers. And then they'll take those. And then when we say, oh, well, this government isn't anything like what we want, we need to rise up, we won't have anything left. 1984 wasn't supposed to be a how-to manual, but it sure seems like it's become that. Anyway, alright, I'm probably going to release this on the 4th of July. I might get it uploaded yet tonight on the 3rd. So, I want you to have a safe and happy 4th of July. Come back to work on the 5th with all of the digits you left with on the 3rd. But I want you to remember, we talk a lot around Christmas time in the Protestant circles. We say, remember the reason for the season. It's 4th of July. Remember the reason for the season. Happy Treason Day. All right. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do that. I've got links for that down below. If you're watching on Gunstreamer, you can hit the Contribute Us link and sign up at whatever monthly level you want. I've just opened it up so you can support if you want. Probably more important than that, I've got links below for Firearms Policy Coalition, Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America. If you're not a member of an organization that's helping fight for our rights, you need to join. You need to get in the fight. I've got a link down below if you want to follow me on Facebook. I try to share things from the other resources that I follow. If I come across a good deal in anything, I'll post that up there. Most of that's going to come from Mr. Guns and Gear. I follow him. Maybe you should too. Cut out the middleman there. And I've got a collection of affiliate links on my Facebook page pinned up to the top. I'm not big enough yet to have an Amazon influencer store, so for right now, I've got some affiliate links. If you've seen it on the channel or I recommend it, you can find a link there. If you use that link to make your purchase, the channel gets a little bit of something and it doesn't cost you anything extra. So thanks for watching. Until next time, shoot straight, stay safe.